Cool. Thank you so much for jumping on the podcast, Martin. Obviously, this is the 8th episode now of the security space. And the topic that we will be going through today is all about identity access management and how it can sometimes be seen as a little bit of the forgotten pillar of security, so to speak. I think it could be a really interesting topic. So, obviously, before we get into it, Martin, just give us a quick background to yourself, mate.
Sure. I work for ForgeRock. Been in security for about 25 years now in various areas. For the last few years in identity and access management, and ForgeRock is a vendor for IAM. We help people safely and easily connect to access the connected world. The stretch goal is imagine a world where you never have to log in again. Which is why I particularly like what I do at the moment, because we have this open goal. And like you said, the identity is kind of a forgotten pillar of security, bit of an underdog, which is constantly underestimated and needs far more attention.
We always love an underdog story, don't we? So, yeah, that's probably the best place to kick it off is, for a lot of people, they might be like, yeah, I know about sort of, identity access management. But to those that don't, could you give us sort of, a definition as to what identity access management is?
Sure. I mean, it's probably one of the most difficult questions to ask, what is IAM? Because if you put 6 IAM architects in a room, you probably will get about 12 definitions of what identity and access management is. But long story short is making sure that the right people or the right entities have the right access to the right resources at the right time. So making sure that we authenticate and authorize every single action that we do, and look into things like entitlements and context security, authentication factors like username, password, passwordless, making sure that the malicious actors cannot access the data and then leak it or use it in a fraudulent manner.
Okay, and is that all what ForgeRock do? Or is it just your department? Is it are you just an identity access management company, or do you do other things as well?
So we are predominantly identity and access management, but we look at the identity from the perspective of the whole life cycle. So it's not just access management, it's also identity management. So joiner, mover, leavers, we look into things like provisioning and integrating those hybrid environments with legacy applications and enforcing security on behalf of the applications. I think the most important factor here is that we're not very prescriptive, and we don't do things. For example, you want MFA, there's a tick box. You've got your MFA. You want passwordless, it's a tick box. We're not prescriptive like that. We focus on the business first. And the way we've built the platform with our orchestration is exactly that. So you design your journeys, you tell us how your digital journey should look like, and then you draw it on the orchestration canvas, if you like, and make those happen. So we build journeys based on business and based on requirements rather than on how we interpret identity and access management.
Okay, and as with anything in security, it needs to constantly evolve. And obviously, I know that MFA as you've alluded to it a couple of times there. Has that sort of evolved in the last 10 years, or has identity access management evolved in the last years? How does it sort of, does it still look the same, or because like you say, you've had a couple decades of experience now for yourself? So how's it sort of changed in the last 10 years?
Right. So identity and access management started to play a more key role in security, in particular, because it's the front door to the data in the product. So if you rewind 20 years ago, and when we talk about security, we think about all those exciting things like penetration testing, like risk assessments, like code, like looking for vulnerabilities, Matrix movie, Trinity using SSH CR32 exploit to shut down the power grid. And all of this is great, but the malicious behavior and the fraud became a business. And it's kind of what's easier. So I can spend $200,000 on a zero-day exploit, take it from the darknet, or I can spend probably a couple of $1,000s to run a phishing campaign to bypass all that. And identity is on the forefront of security today. If you imagine we started to build our homes, and I'll use this analogy. We started to build very thick walls and insulation and very hardened windows so you cannot break. And then we put the door into the house. And this is our front door to our application. The house is our application. And if you put really bad locks into the door,
Yep.
that's the easiest way in, right? If you put too many locks on the door, you're also weakening the door. So the right balance of security controls within identity space is absolutely critical to protecting our applications. And if you look at the recent breaches that we had, I'm not going to quote who it is because I'm not here to shame. And I always say that being hacked is okay, just not knowing about that is not okay. Most of those hacks, most of those leaks are because of weak identity and access management rather than someone running an exploit and a zero-day code.
So from what you're saying there, it sounds like it's a very sort of lean sort of tool in security. It's very sort of lean and efficient. Is that what you're sort of saying? Have I understood that correctly?
Yes, absolutely. So Microsoft released 10 or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, Microsoft released those 10 immutable laws of security. And one of them says weak passwords trump strong security. Now, as we evolved, we're moving towards passwordless. It's not just about passwords, it's about protecting machine-to-machine flows and not just human flows. I would rewrite that and say weak identity trumps strong security. So no matter how many controls you put around vulnerability scanning and management and your code reviews, if your front door is weak, it's not going to do you any good.
Yep. Okay. No, that makes sense. So obviously, to the everyday man, then, like you say, even sort of the man on the street might even understand sort of like what a penetration tester does, what an ethical hacker does, but like how would you sort of explain what the function of IAM to the wider world? Obviously we've used the analogy, but how would we sort of explain it a little bit further in terms of what identity access management actually does?
Sure. So identity and access management means just removing that logic from the application in general. So if you think about you have multiple applications in your portfolio, and every single one of them will need to ask for username and password. Let's stay temporarily on a dated concept of username and password.
Yep.
Every single application we need to have its login page, which needs to be hardened, needs to pass the credentials, need to store the credentials, and all of those applications don't know about each other. So it's a very siloed view of identity. If you remove that from the logic of the application and you do it on behalf of the application, suddenly you get this single view of identity across all of your applications, and you have only one place to harden. And actually, why would you do that yourself? It would be like reinventing a wheel, right? So if you want to have a document editor, you either go Microsoft Office or Google Docs, right? You're not gonna build your own. And it's very similar to identity. Instead of building that logic into your application, you can use those third-party tools which are available off the shelf and just remove the logic from application. We call this federation. So federate or put the enforcement points in front of your application and enforce that security on your behalf. Meaning that if I log in to one application, I don't need to log into another application. But if my credentials are compromised, we can stop that access for all applications at the same time. So that gives you not only the single point of view across the users from the security perspective, but also from the business perspective, and it lets you to analyze and know your customers a bit better and what they do and what services they access.
See, my understanding would be that if I was sort of like a CISO or looking at my security toolings, IAM would be at the top of my list. But as the topic of this podcast alludes to, it very much is forgotten. So why is it so far down on the list? Why do not more people know? What are the negative connotations attached with it? Why are we having this conversation, and why do we need to bring awareness to this, Marcin?
That's a great question. Luckily, we do see a shift in the area, and we do see more and more businesses employing off-the-shelf solutions in the IAM space. But I think it's the legacy. So in general, you don't put the spanner into a working machine, and there's always something more important to do until something bad really happens. And I think that not everyone's just seeing the benefits of identity. This is why we go on those campaigns. This is why we have this podcast to explain to people that there are different ways of achieving security within identity space, that you
Yep.
can reap rewards from not just the security aspect, but also from the business aspect. And just not everyone gets the visibility. And everyone thinks that, when you click login with Facebook is just so simple, while in fact it's a very complex process, and things happen on the back end that are beyond what we would ever think of. So if you think about banking and financial services and fraud prevention, all of that is around identity.
Yeah. And when you see identity, a zero trust security often comes sort of hand in hand with the tooling. So could you explain that a little bit further? Because obviously I know that they go hand in hand, but why does it do that?
So zero trust, obviously, it's been there for a while. So I think 1994 is when we had the first, for the first time, someone said zero trust. So it's not a new thing. And by the way, COVID has not just changed zero trust. COVID made us realize that we need more zero trust. But long story short, zero trust says that you have to authenticate and authorize everyone regardless where they're coming from. So in the
Yep.
old world, we had this perimeter security where if you are inside your office, your building, or your data center, any traffic coming from that space, from that IP address is trusted. Anything outside of the building is untrusted. But like I said, we have more code these days. Over 20 years, we have more connected devices, more code, more applications. More applications, more vulnerabilities. Although we get a good grip on security scanning and everything and pen testing, it's still a possibility to get a malware. So I can't really trust anything. And what identity does is enforces that trust on every endpoint. So this is not just you, Nick, logging into your bank account, but this is also making sure that when your banking service makes a backend call to a third party, that call is also authenticated. So identity can be the front door not just to human-based flows, but to machine flows, and that helps with the zero trust model. Now, the zero trust model can go far more, because really, if you want to look deeper, you may say, okay, I've authenticated the user and I allow them to send the email. But if we can look into the context of that email, or the content of that email, and say, is that something that this guy would really write? That's the true zero trust concept, right? So the identity gives you the ability to lightweight implement and enforce that without coding your own logic within your application. So very often we would take your applications and turn them into this very rude term, a dump endpoint, right? So a dump endpoint is something that is just tells things to be done. Give me that data, and the endpoint gives that data. There is no authorization, there's no authentication, but there's a trust between the enforcement point in front that is fueled by an entity and the application itself. So we do it on the behalf of the application.
Right. So my understanding is that IAM sort of it sort of boosts these trust models. Is that correct? It kind of reinforces it. Is that what you're saying?
It powers, reinforces it, and brings a good order into your whole ecosystem.
Okay. So obviously, again, just to jump back to the the MFA that's associated with identity, what's like the downsides of having MFA? Obviously, I know the upsides is it's multi-layered, therefore it's harder for breaches because it has to go through multiple avenues. But is the downsides to the users, and is that hence why maybe it's not as sexy in the world of security because it takes longer and everyone's in a rush these days? Is it what would you say is the negative effects of having sort of an MFA tooling?
So first of all, it's a tricky problem to have, because let's look at the fundamental issue here, and that's users. We humans, we have different opinions, and MFA can be considered friction, which means that if I put my username and password, that's one thing that I need to do. If I then have to go into my mobile phone and copy the 6-digit number, paste it in, that's friction. That's an additional step, right? So we have people that like that because that gives them assurance and security and sense of security, knowing that even if my credentials leak, no one will be able to log in. But there are others that they say that that's friction. I don't want that. In my opinion, and where the world of security is going, MFA will either have to become a standard, or we need to go passwordless and much stronger assurance device-based methods rather than use them in password. There is, I don't know, 24 billion password combinations available on the darknet today. So it's just simply not enough to ask for username and password.
Yep.
But asking for MFA every single time is friction, and users don't like that. Well, we do have solutions that allow to have that in balance, right? So before we go into this fully immersed passwordless journey where the authentication factor is much stronger than just a knowledge factor, think about risk-based authentication. This is something relatively new on the market, which means that if you log in from a laptop, we will challenge you with MFA, and that can be SMS or phone call or WebAuthn or fingerprint, whatever, right? And then we start learning your behavior and looking at you as a user. What devices you're using, what operating system, what browser. And from then on, this session is kind of a long-lived. And only if we observe anomaly in your behavior, for example, you have impossible travel scenario. So you've logged in from London at 8, and then someone logs in with your credentials from New York at 9. You cannot make that journey in an hour, right? So if something like this happens and we notice anomaly, then we can challenge you with the additional factor with the MFA, which means that the risk-based authentication looks at you as a user, paints the picture, and then lets you to reduce friction when appropriate, add friction when add appropriate friction when it's needed, or deny access when the risk is just too high. So it allows you to kind of maintain or even increase security posture while having still frictionless journeys.
It gives you the flexibility to scale up and down your security as and
Absolutely.
when needed. Yeah, and again, leads back to your earlier point about it being quite a lean sort of tooling and security again. So okay, it's the dots are getting connected now, which is good. So when it comes to identity, then is there elements of some people doing too much? Is there elements of people not doing enough? What would be your sorts of thoughts when it comes to that?
Yes, that's actually a great question and a problem. So people that do too much, for example, they say, I don't want to take any risks. I'm going to do MFA every single time, and I'm going to add that friction every single time because that saves my business, that prevents fraud, or that limits fraud to minimum. At the same time, I'm giving bad user experience. What would be also bad is someone we say, SMS is known to be a weak method. We all know that. So having SMS as a multi-factor is a great thing, but all of those multi-factor authentication factors, SMS is probably the weakest. So let's not use SMS. Let's use push notification into smartphones. And then we're going to enforce that. And in principle, it's easy. You get a notification, you just press the button, do Face ID, you're in. And then we have people that are digitally vulnerable, for example, older people, or people who come from poor families or come from third world countries and they don't have smartphones. And it's a thing, by the way. We have students at universities in UK that don't have smartphones. We automatically excluding them because we say security is this thing that is the most important. I'm not going to use SMS. I'm going to exclude everyone else. That's too much. Okay. Now, then we have people who do too little, which is just username and password because that's the least amount of friction. And I don't care that those credentials are stolen or not. And that doesn't just give enough sort of assurance to the user. And then there's something in between when we really look at the business and the adaptive identity. Adaptive identity means that let's look at the baseline. Okay, SMS is not secure enough, right? So we're going to remove that from the mainstream of our authentication, and we're going to enforce users by using apps and push notifications into your mobile phones. But then we look at the minority of those users who cannot do that, and we allow only them to use the SMS. We need to have some criteria that allows us to mark them vulnerable, but we allow to do that. And in security, we have this great concept of defense in depth, right?
Okay.
It was during um, perimeter-based security where you have DMZ and application zone and DB zone. We have this defense in depth, and in everywhere in security we can have defense in depth. So I can say that if I know that you're logging in from the device that I've observed before, and I've delivered some sort of digital fingerprint of that device, I will allow you to use SMS as the method because overall the risk is much lower. And that's the adaptive identity. This is where identity needs to go. It needs to be connected, adaptive. And by the way, no one goes through their lives on their own, right? So imagine this scenario. I'm coming to work and I forgot my phone, and it's the push notification that needs to. And I've got a meeting, and I'm in sales, and it's $1 million deal. I need to go there in 10 minutes. I'm particularly vulnerable because I may lose my job because of that. So I'm calling the customer services desk and I'm saying, hey, I'm Marcin. This is my ID. By the way, I've just printed it on a 200 quid printer. It looks great. And they say, yeah, we know you. What's your dog's name? Tilda. Everyone knows my dog's name is Tilda. It's all over the Facebook, right? So why is the person that knows me least so confirming that me is me instead of my boss, my brother, my sister? So where I'm going with this is the identity is connected and peer based as well. We can connect those flows and say, if I forgot my device or if I have a problem, why can't my manager confirm that me is me? Why can't we switch that context throughout the authentication so he or she confirms that I am who I am, and they will know whether I'm an imposter or not, right? And we can get in. So connected, omni-channel, and adaptive is where identity should be going these days.
Okay. And so it means that obviously it has to be quite fluid as well, which means it needs to be constantly, changing as well. How do you sort of, because it has to be adaptive based on the individual using it. So how can it be? How can you do that for every single person? Like surely that is just not possible, and surely that links into why sort of humans sometimes are the cause and the cure of security. Like, what do you think you'll ever be able to get sort of a one size fits all kind of methodology when it comes to identity, or do you think no, it has to be to the individual? What's your sort of thoughts on that?
Well, the short answer to this, Nick, is no. There is no one fits all solution. But I have another concept that I like to call everyone can drive a Ferrari. Right? And what it means is that if we look at all those factors and those authentication journeys using multiple MFAs or passwordless methods, which we also have a few, instead of saying prescriptively, this is what I want you to use, but you can use something else, you can use something else, we look at those methods and we say, let's pick up the factors that meet the security baseline and the risk appetite of the organization. So I like those 5 methods, and I don't care which method the user will use. And we give that ownership and that we empower users by making them have that choice. If they want to use SMS with those extra assurances in place around devices, they can do that. If they want to use push notification, fine. If they want to use WebAuthn and fingerprint, that's absolutely fine. If you give this choice to the users, it will naturally adapt to the best journey for themselves rather than being prescriptive and trying to figure that, from the start, you are this person, let's do something about that. So empowerment is everything. Self-service is everything. Users need to have access to the data, need to see what we know about them. They need to know how we process that data and how they need to be part of this decisioning process of how they're being authenticated if the overall security of that method is within the risk appetite of the organization.
Yep. It's a good analogy, that as well. And and this is my last question, Martin. So obviously we've kind of covered sort of where it's progressed from 10 years ago. We've talked about the current state of play. What do you sort of perceive the next 10 years to be in identity? Because like I say, everyone's looking for leaner tools now. Do you think that it's going to become a more sought after, more respected brother of security, or where do you see identity going in the next 10 years with security and with the advancements of DevSecOps, secure by design? Surely it is going to go hand in hand with that. What's your thoughts on the next 10 years, Marcin?
Well, if you ask for the ghost of identity future, I think identity will become more and more seamless. It's not going to disappear as a concept, but the user experience is going to go to a further plan. And if you look at ForgeRock's mission, like, and this is what I really love about ForgeRock, is that imagine a world where you don't have to log in again, right? That doesn't mean that there's no login. That doesn't mean that we're not authenticating and authorizing your actions, but that means that this process can be seamless. And the first step in seamless is passwordless. So if I don't need to put my credentials, my username and password, or have my phone with me, if I can just put my fingerprint against the Touch ID on my MacBook or Windows Hello, I kind of didn't have to log in, right? I just unlocked some resources that I can now consume. If we then continue observing that behavior, we're not going to challenge you with the credentials or with the WebAuthn again until something's off. So that's definitely where the identity is going. But definitely, we're moving towards a concept called decentralized identity, where everything is in the wallet, where we don't have those multiple identity providers. We have issuers and consumers. And what decentralized identity allows you to do is crazy stuff. For example, if you want to watch BBC iPlayer, they will ask you for your address. They want to make sure that you live in UK. Based on that, they will allow you, because you need to have the TV licensing and everything, all that malarkey.
Yeah.
Right? So decentralized identity allow you to verify that the person is living in the UK without actually checking the address.
Okay.
So if you're trying to access services that are available to only, for example, some financial services, credits are only available to people over 18, we can allow you to have that service, confirming that you are of age without actually disclosing your date of birth. And that's where identity is going. It's going to be more and more seamless, more and more forgotten from the user perspective, and more embedded into the digital journeys.
Yep. No, that's really interesting. That, and obviously, do you think that's going to actually come in play? Like, because it seems like a great idea. Do you think like what's stopping it already being in play?
It's a great question, and when it comes, let's break it down, right? So decentralized identity, we're still working on it, about integrating and migrating. This is still not necessarily a dream, but a kind of the next 5 to 10 years thing, right?
Yep.
When it comes to passwordless, I challenge everyone. We have no excuses anymore because we have the technology in place, and we are on a quest to convince the businesses that passwordless is the future. Some time ago, I posted on LinkedIn and I asked, "Hey guys, why are you not using passwordless?" And I got tons of messages. And to respond to that, I've tried to build those journeys that sort of solve all the perceived problems of passwordless.
Yeah.
And predominantly is the lack of trust and the management of those methods because you're bound to a device. This all can be solved today. So we're building a lot of demos. Like we demoed it on IAM's Gartner in London a couple of weeks back. Fear not, passwordless is here.
Yep.
It can be implemented. There are ways to move from password to passwordless, and there are ways to go passwordless from day one. So I see absolutely no excuse for not going down that route. And I think that within next 2-3 years, we are going to observe more and more. If you look at eBay, if you look at some trading platforms like Free Trade, there's no concept of passwords. And then eBay allows you to use WebAuthn now. It's kind of a mixture of things because you still revert to password, but it shows that even the biggest vendors or the biggest sort of giants like eBay are moving towards that direction because it's the right thing to do. And I think we're going to observe that more.
Probably going to be like you say, a domino effect of like, okay, they're doing it, we'll do it, and it's just who's going to do it first. So, but no, Marcin, been an absolute delight, mate. Thank you so much for jumping on the security space. If anybody wants, any further information from Marcin, I'll get all his details. I'll get all the ForgeRock details into the comment section of this video. But yeah, once again, thanks a lot, Marcin.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Perfect.